offered by Chaplain Kibben.
Would you pray with me? Holy God, we humble ourselves and pray to you, yielding our wills to yours and giving ourselves over to your authority. We pray that you would be merciful in your discipline. Search our hearts and melt all hardness that you find therein. Liberate us from the bonds of hostility that prevent us from living lives of love and compassion. Inspire us also to humble ourselves and to unite in prayer as a nation. Search the soul of our society and speak into the pain and suffering. Hold us accountable to the countless ways we are inclined to stray from your will. Then silence the voices within and among us which vie for power and strive to eliminate cooperation. Remind us of your desire for mutual and respectful dialogue, and of our responsibility to respect those with whom you have called us to serve. Call us not to listen for our own counsel, but to heed your own. Call us out when we hasten to judge the differences of opinion rather than work for the common good. And call us from our intransigence into your transcendent presence, that we would experience your grace and be transformed by your Spirit. May we serve the people, your people, with kindness and wisdom this day. In your divine name we pray. Amen.
Pursuant to Section 11A of House Resolution 188, the Journal of the Last Day's Proceedings is approved. The Pledge of Allegiance will be led by the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Joyce.
Would you please join with me in the pledge to our flag? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The chair will entertain up to 5 requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentleman from Rhode Island seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to urge my colleagues to support reinstating the assault weapons ban. The AR-15 has become the weapon of choice for shooters looking to kill as many people as possible in as little time as possible. Researchers estimate that if we still had a federal assault weapons ban, we'd see 70% fewer mass shooting deaths. The number of mass shootings has skyrocketed since the original assault weapons ban expired in 2004. These weapons have been used in the deadliest shootings in our history, from Sandy Hook to Parkland to Uvalde. They're weapons of war that have no place in our community. This is the amount of damage which is done by one bullet fired by an AR-15 when it enters the body. That's the bullet. That's the size of the damage. The bodies of kids in Uvalde were riddled so badly with wounds that their parents had to use DNA tests to identify their own children. One family identified their child by their shoes. Their shoes. These weapons don't just kill, they slaughter, they decimate. They're designed for death and maximum destruction. They have no place in our schools, in our streets, or anywhere in our communities. We know that the original assault weapons ban worked, and we have to reinstate it before more innocent lives are lost.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania rise?
Madam Speaker, I rise to address the House and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, this week we mark the 78th anniversary of the D-Day landing in northern France. 3 years ago, I had the honor of visiting the Normandy coastline to see the Utah and Omaha beaches, to see the memorial where the 2nd Ranger Battalion made their heroic stand, to see the graves of the men who did not come home and who are now buried in the French countryside. Those who fought in Normandy and across France on the road to victory in Europe, they came from all walks of life. Those individuals were bound by a common goal, to stand for freedom and to liberate the oppressed. They were part of our nation's greatest generation. And now, as they grow older and move on to their eternal salvation, we must continue to remember their courage, remember their sacrifice. Their legacy of service and bravery is at the heart of what makes the United States the greatest nation on the earth. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Massachusetts rise?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today in support of the common sense gun safety legislation my colleagues and I have introduced this week. The horrific shootings in Buffalo and Uvalde are a painful reminder that action to stop gun violence is long overdue, and that Republicans' decades of stonewalling is an intentional decision to allow Americans, including children, to continue to be slaughtered. In particular, the GOP and its gun policy puppet master, the NRA, is obsessed with assault weapons. As a Marine, I ate, trained, patrolled, and slept with an assault weapon for 4 years. These are weapons of war designed to kill humans. There is no constitutional defense for civilian ownership of assault weapons, even under the D.C. Heller interpretation of the Second Amendment. And there is certainly no rational explanation for why a mentally disturbed young man should be able to purchase a weapon of war along with high-capacity magazines with no questions asked. The GOP needs to stand up to the NRA and its dangerous juvenile obsession with assault weapons. Otherwise, this slaughter will continue. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today in memory of Jimmy Burke, Jr., a loving father and husband, servant, leader, and veteran from the great state of Georgia. Jimmy was born in Savannah in 1935 and grew up on Tybee Island, where he lived and served throughout his life. He was devoted to his family and community and showed pride in being a true Irish Savannian. His Irish heritage was very close to his heart, as shown by him serving as a member of the St. Patrick's Day Committee for 65 years. He was even elected to be the distinguished Grand Marshal of the St. Patrick's Day Parade in 1993. He served in many ways, such as a founding member of the Irish Heritage Society, being elected to the Tybee Island City Council, and serving as the president of the Tybee Island Republicans. Jimmy also served his country in the United States Marine Corps Reserve for 8 years and the 117th Georgia Air National Guard for 3 years. He will continue to smile down on Savannah and Tybee Island through his family and his noble service to the Irish community. Jimmy will surely be missed by all who knew him. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Pell Grant Program. 50 years ago, Congress amended the Higher Education Act by creating the Basic Educational Opportunity Grant to provide direct financial aid to low-income students so that they would have the same opportunities and the same access to higher education as others. Since then, the Pell Grant has been a cornerstone investment in the lives and futures of nearly 80 million students across the country. In my district, more than $123 million in Pell Grants have been awarded to students just last year. Think of the difference that has made. As a former educator myself, I know the cost is one of the largest barriers to higher education, and here in Congress, I will continue to do everything in my power to support the Pell Grant program and ensure it continues to break down that very barrier. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
To ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. A survey by the Wall Street Journal found that 83% of Americans describe the state of the economy as poor or not so good. President Biden's approval ratings are in free fall, and the American people are correct in holding him accountable for the skyrocketing prices. Since entering office, President Biden's policies of big government spending and attacks on American energy have weakened America's economy and placed enormous burden on working families. My Republican colleagues and I have called on President Biden to reverse course. The President should take immediate steps to unleash American energy stop the out-of-control spending, and focus on the real issues that are hitting Americans in their pocketbooks. President Biden is completely out of touch. What's worse, our children and grandchildren will be responsible for paying for his mess. President Biden must stop blaming others for his failures and start embracing the solutions that are in the best interest of the American people. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition?
Unanimous consent to address the House. 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yesterday, during the debate on guns, Representative Jordan and a few others on the Republican side said that the Second Amendment and the right to guns was a God-given right. I don't know anything in the Old Testament where God spoke to guns. I do know he spoke to Moses and gave him the Ten Commandments and said nothing about AR-15s or guns, but he said, "Thou shalt not kill." In the New Testament, I don't think Jesus said anything about guns or AR-15s, but he did say, "You shall beat your swords into plowshares." We're all created in the image of God, and I'm sure God would not like his powers, his name, and his authority to endorse the killing of young people through weapons that he was allegedly giving AR-15s. God would look askance at that type of logic. God bless America.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
Request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, please.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to congratulate student athletes from the University of Virginia for their success in winning the 2022 NCAA Division I Men's Tennis National Championship. Each year, the NCAA supports student athletes from roughly 1,100 institutions of higher learning, sponsoring 90 championships in 24 sports. Over 500,000 student athletes from across the United States compete each year for a national championship. Winning an NCAA championship is truly a remarkable achievement and deserving of celebration. On Sunday, May 22nd, 2022, the many years of hard work and perseverance of these UVA student athletes paid off. They defeated Kentucky 4-0, securing the program's 5th NCAA Division I Men's National Championship, all of those coming in the last 10 years. I'm proud to rise today to congratulate these student athletes and the University of Virginia for this great achievement. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, as the Biden inflation worsens and Americans are forced to choose between buying groceries or filling their gas tanks, Democrats will hold a primetime, Hollywood-produced sham hearing of their unconstitutional Select Committee to investigate January 6th. Most Americans won't watch. In fact, America's most watched news source, Fox News, won't even be covering the hearing live. That won't stop Democrats from trying to pull out all the stops to do whatever they can to distract the American people from their inability to effectively govern. They've even hired a slick ABC News producer to produce the hearing to ensure their spectacle is ready for prime time. I hope come November, when folks head to the polls, they remember Democrats decided to put politics first instead of focusing on the real-life issues we all face today. It is truly a shame. Madam Speaker, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, pursuant to House Resolution 1153, I call up H.R. 2377, the Federal Extreme Risk Protection Order Act of 2021 and ask for its immediate consideration in the House.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 256, H.R. 2377, a bill to authorize the issuance of extreme risk protection orders.
Pursuant to House Resolution 1153, in lieu of the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on the Judiciary printed in the bill, an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee print 117-46, modified by the amendment printed in House Report 117-356, is adopted, and the bill as amended is considered read. The bill as amended shall be debatable for 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on the Judiciary or their respective designees. The gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler, and the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Jordan, will each control 30 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New York.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and insert extraneous material on H.R. 2377.
Without objection.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, over the past several weeks, we have watched in horror as gun violence has touched communities across the country, and dozens of people, young and old, have lost their lives. The details of each case may differ, each tragic in its own way, but there is one theme that comes up most often. Someone deeply troubled, experiencing some sort of crisis, had easy access to firearms. And all too often, the warning signs were clear, but nothing was done to keep guns out of their hands before it was too late. H.R. 2377, the Federal Extreme Risk Protection Order Act, provides a sensible means by which someone who is exhibiting dangerous behavior can be prevented from possessing or purchasing firearms before tragedy strikes. This legislation, introduced by Representative Lucy McBath, authorizes federal courts to issue an Extreme Risk Protection Order, or ERPO, temporarily removing firearms from a person in crisis and preventing them from purchasing firearms. This only occurs after the court determines that there is evidence demonstrating that the person poses an imminent danger of injuring himself, herself, or others. The bill also includes legislation by Representative Salud Carbayal, which provides funding to states to enact ERPO statutes of their own. We know that extreme risk laws save lives. We have witnessed their effectiveness in state after state, beginning in 2016 when California passed the first such law. Since then, 18 other states and the District of Columbia have enacted similar laws. An analysis of the first 3 years of California's extreme risk law found that these orders were used for 58 mass shooting threats, including 6 in which a minor threatened to target a school. These orders were also used in response to 82 threats of suicide, and they worked. No suicides occurred among individuals who were subject to the orders. Federal courts have long been bastions of due process, and accordingly this legislation includes strong due process provisions that strike the appropriate balance between protecting the rights of the gun owner and ensuring community safety. Every court that has reviewed laws similar to this bill has found that the procedural safeguards are sufficient. And as then Seventh Circuit Judge Amy Coney Barrett wrote, "History is consistent with common sense. It demonstrates that legislatures have the power to prohibit dangerous people from possessing guns." Madam Speaker, the Constitution does not require us to wait until lives are lost. As we address the scourge of gun violence, a blight that killed 45,000 Americans in 2020 alone, let us remember that there are no perfect solutions. We are painfully aware that we cannot do enough to save every life, and there is no one answer that will solve this problem. But we do know that taking guns out of the hands of people who pose a danger to themselves or others would save countless lives. This legislation would take meaningful steps to prevent gun violence tragedies in our communities, while at the same time protecting the due process rights of those individuals in crisis. I want to thank Representatives McBath and Carbayal for their leadership on this issue. I urge all members to support the bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would yield 3 minutes to my friend and
The gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Johnson.
The gentleman from Louisiana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan, for yielding. You know, we've heard some revealing things this week. It was just a few moments ago, our colleague from Tennessee, Mr. Cohen, lectured us that the Old Testament doesn't mention the word guns, and so we shouldn't claim that this is a fundamental freedom. You know, as usual, he misunderstands the point of Scripture and the Constitution. Here's the thing. As Americans, we respect and we protect the inalienable God-given right to self-protection and to the protection of innocent lives around us. President Biden said, among other outrageous things this week we've heard, President Biden said that he wanted to ban 9mm handguns. That's one of the most widely owned handguns by law-abiding citizens in this country. Mr. Cicilline of Rhode Island, now infamously in our committee hearing, exclaimed, quote, "Spare me the BS," that's not what he said, "spare me the BS about constitutional rights." It's pretty revealing. Mr. Jones, in the same hearing just a few moments later, he said that if Democrats don't get their way on their gun control wish list, that they will abolish the filibuster and pack the Supreme Court. They're saying the quiet parts out loud. See, that wish list that they have includes taking away guns from Americans without the constitutionally required due process of law, which is exactly what this bill would do. It would allow the courts to take guns away from people without notice and without even the right to appear in the hearing to defend themselves in court. Now, the other side is going to tell you, and you'll hear in the argument here, hey, there is due process. Don't worry about it, they'll say, because people subjected to this process, they can just go to court and they can petition to get their firearms back. But I'll let my colleagues in on something that every first-year law student learns. Due process after the fact is no due process at all. Now, the other side's also going to argue here, get ready for it. They're going to claim that they've come up with a reasonable compromise by just making these gun confiscations orders temporary. They'll say it's only going to last 14 days. They won't tell you that these orders can be renewed indefinitely. My Democrat colleagues are going to tell you that this bill will save lives, but if you look at the objective studies, the comprehensive studies on this, you'll find that the red flag laws in all these states have had no significant effect on the rates of murder, suicide, or the number of people killed in mass public shootings. If this bill passes, people may have their information added to the national crime databases even though they committed no crime. In what version of America do we think that's okay? The Democrats claim Republicans don't care about gun violence, but while they may repeat this over and over and over, it doesn't make it any more true. If you look at the record, House Republicans have worked tirelessly to combat gun violence by enacting meaningful laws, to put more resources into mental health, to provide training for guidance counselors and fund grants for law enforcement. The other side, meanwhile, is actively trying to defund police, and just last week, they voted against giving money to schools to enhance security. Democrats refuse to work with us on legislation that would actually do something, that would actually reduce the rate of gun violence in this country. 30 more seconds?
Seconds.
Thank you. And instead, they are taking advantage of tragedies. That's what they're doing. They're taking advantage of tragedies to promote their agenda to destroy our constitutional rights, and it's shameful. I'll tell you this, when Republicans take back the majority next year, we will work to begin to address the root causes of the violence and the mayhem in our country. That day cannot come soon enough. Thank you for the time, and I yield back.
Does the gentleman reserve? Does the gentleman from Ohio reserve?
Yes, we reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 5 minutes to the sponsor of the bill, the gentlelady from Georgia, Ms. McBath.
The gentlelady from Georgia is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today in support of my bill, the Federal Extreme Risk Protection Order Act, a bill that would empower loved ones and law enforcement to help prevent mass shootings before they happen. Every family and every community in our nation deserves access to these life-saving measures. No child, no parent deserves to live in fear of gun violence. And we are paying for it. We're paying for this gun violence every single day, day after day, hour after hour. We're paying for the weapons of war on our streets with the blood of our children in our schools. We are paying for the unfettered access with mothers and fathers waiting in line for a DNA test, forced to find out if it's their child that's riddled with bullets and maimed beyond recognition, if it's their child whose blood now blankets the floor of the classroom where they should be learning math and science and English. We are paying for this deadly gun culture with the lives of American people, with the lives of those that we in this body took an oath to protect. The American people are absolutely exhausted. We cannot continue to be the only country in the world where we let gun violence happen again and again and again. An entire generation is growing up learning that the adults that they look up to cannot, or rather not choose to, protect them. Now, we all agree that this status quo is unacceptable. We all understand that the murder of our children cannot continue. We need policies that will give our law enforcement the tools that they need, the tools they have asked for to help keep guns out of the hands of those who are a danger to themselves or to others. How many more victims are we going to memorialize? What rights do our children have as they grow in our lives and in our hearts? Parents across the country, in every state, in every community, know the fear that accompanies the love that we have for our children. It is a primal fear, a helpless fear, a love so deep that we worry and wonder every day, where is my child? Are they safe? Are they going to make it home today? Don't our parents have the right to send their kids off to school without the fear of them not coming home? Don't our children have the right to live free from the trauma that only stepping over a friend covered in blood could ever bring? How many more parents must receive the phone call that I did when I was told that my son was murdered? The phone call that confirms that fear that my child is dead and that I was unable to protect him. The phone call that leads you to cry out to God in your grief. Was my child afraid? Did he feel pain as the bullets ripped through his skin? Did he know he was loved more than he could ever imagine? We can do better than this. We must be better than this. We cannot be the only nation in the world where our children are torn apart on Tuesday and their deaths are gone from the news cycle by Wednesday. And that's why in the decades since my son was taken from me by a man with a gun, simply for playing loud music in his car, that I made a promise to Jordan and to my community and to the American people, a promise that I would continue to fight this battle for the rest of my life. The fight to make sure that not one more parent is forced to join this ever-growing club, the club that no mother or no father ever wants to be a part of. I promised that I would take all of the devotion as a mother that I have for my child, all the love that I poured out of my soul into my child, that I would do everything in my power to keep Jordan's community safe. Yes, you, my community. That the time would come where we would be able to make a difference in the lives of our children and our children's children. And this is that time. This is that moment. We are facing the challenge of our lifetime and the issue of our era.
Gentlelady, an extra 30 seconds.
This is that time. This is that moment. We are facing the challenge of our lifetime. This is the issue of our era. And today we must vote with the majority of American people that agree with us. We vote to provide law enforcement and family members the tools that they need to prevent these mass shootings. We vote to save lives. We vote to do what is right. We vote to stop the uniquely American horror that is ripping our families apart. God bless us, and I ask God to cover us in doing the right thing. And I yield back.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I recognize or yield 2 minutes to the gentlelady from Arizona, Ms. Lesko.
The gentlelady from Arizona is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Representative Jordan. I rise in opposition to H.R. 2377. I have 5 grandchildren. I would do anything to protect my 5 grandchildren, including, as a last resort, shooting them if I had to protect the lives of my grandchildren. Democrat bills that we've heard this week want to take away my right to protect my grandchildren. They want to take away the rights of law-abiding citizens to protect their own children and grandchildren and wives and brothers and sisters. This bill takes away due process from law-abiding citizens. Can you imagine if you had a disgruntled ex or somebody who hates you because of your political views, and they go to a judge and say, oh, this person is dangerous, and that judge would take away your guns, lean on the side of conservatism, take away the guns, without that person even having a knowledge that there was a court hearing that would take away their guns. This is wrong. When Republicans were in the majority, we actually passed legislation that was signed into law that would have prevented mass shootings. These bills would not. We need to join together, Republicans and Democrats. I hope they can do it in the Senate and get something done that actually saves children's lives. And with that, I yield back.
Reserve, Madam Speaker.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record a June 7, 2022 Washington Post article entitled No Red Flag Laws Don't Violate Due Process Rights.
Without objection.
And Madam Speaker, I want to excoriate as absolute nonsense, pernicious nonsense, what we just heard from Mr. Johnson, from Ms. Lesko, and what I presume we'll hear for the rest of the debate on this bill. Red flag laws are in effect in 18 states and the District of Columbia. Every court that has considered them has found them constitutional. Every court has said that they meet the requirements of procedural due process. Every single court. I now yield 1 minute to the Speaker of the House, Ms. Pelosi.
The Speaker of the House is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Thank the gentleman for yielding, and I thank him for bringing his superior knowledge of our Constitution and the law of the land to bear in this important debate for the children. Yesterday, as we had the debate on so many other pieces of legislation which passed with bipartisan support, we said it was of the children, by the children, and for the children. Of them because they are suffering, by them because they are testifying in the Congress of the United States, apparently to no avail to some in the Congress, but making an emotional appeal to the facts of their case to the American people. And again, all of it for the children. To the Protecting Our Kids Act. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for bringing that to the floor. The legislation passed yesterday had strong steps to save lives, whether it was raising the age to purchase weapons of war, to outlawing bump stocks and high-capacity magazines designed for mass murder, to cracking down on gun trafficking and ghost guns, and to strengthening safe storage requirements, to name just a few. Today, the House builds on this progress by passing our Federal Extreme Risk Protections Order Act, another life-saving measure aimed at preventing the next tragic shooting before it is too late. Too often, what we know is that those who pose a risk of gun violence show early warning signs, a menacing message online, a troubled message to a loved one. Yet in too many communities across the country, Concerned family members, friends, and law enforcement have no legal pathway to get deadly weapons out of the hands of these troubled individuals. Under the leadership of Congresswoman Lucy McBath, the House will pass a bill empowering family members and law enforcement to seek a federal court order to temporarily remove access to a gun from individuals who pose a threat to themselves and to others. And thanks to the leadership of Congresswoman Salud Carbajal, this legislation will include incentives to encourage more states to adopt extreme risk protection order laws of their own. The incentives exist in many states, but not all. Doing so will not only protect from mass shootings, but also from the quiet, daily massacre by suicide and gun crimes. These so-called red flag laws by some are saving lives in the 19 states, and as was mentioned, the District of Columbia, where they have been enacted. The statistics show that. And the American people are overwhelmingly for this life-saving measure. Recent polling show 8 in 10 Americans support it. Madam Speaker, as you know, you've experienced in your state, gun violence in our nation has reached a fever pitch in recent weeks. People keep saying again and again and again, we have gun violence. I would say it's not again and again and again. It's always. It's not one after another. It's ongoing, whether it's mass murders that are high profile or every night in cities across our across our country. Sadly, too many members think in the wake of gun violence, a moment of silence is sufficient. A moment of silence. As Mr. Higgins said following the Buffalo massacre, we have a moment of silence, and then we must have action. And then we must have action. Today, all members have a chance to take action, to vote for another strong step, giving our communities a chance to prevent the next massacre. Indeed, as you know, and it even might not even be a massacre, it could be a family tragedy. So it's personal as well as community protection. Indeed, if you knew where and when the next gun incident would be, how could you oppose having the tools to possibly stop it? If you knew that children could possibly be exposed because of the action of someone, practically a child themselves, still a teenager, having access to a weapon of war, why wouldn't you want to take action to stop it? I urge all of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to join us in a strong bipartisan vote for this legislation. In states across the country, this is not partisan at all. Let's hope that it would not be in the House of Representatives. At the same time, we remain very, very prayerful and hopeful that the Senate will soon reach bipartisan agreement so that we'll move a step closer to freeing our children from the horrors of gun violence once and for all. Our children, whether it's violence to them or violence to their parents and family members, for the children, of the children, by the children. That's our mission. I urge an aye vote and yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
The gentlewoman yields.
Reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield a minute and a half to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Good.
The gentleman from Virginia is recognized for a minute and a half.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. One of the most fundamental God-given rights that we possess, which is uniquely protected in our American Constitution, is the right to keep and bear arms for self-defense and to ensure that we remain a free people. We have seen under this administration, supported by the Democrat majority in this Congress, an unprecedented trampling on the basic rights of American citizens over the past 2 years. Our most precious freedoms to assemble together, to go where you want, to worship as you choose, to earn a living or operate your business, to keep your job or your employees, what you have to wear on your face, and whether or not you are required to receive a vaccine that you may not want or may not need, all trampled upon by Democrats in power. Democrats simply do not believe in the inalienable rights of American citizens to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They believe that your rights come from government, and they therefore have the right to take them away. The guarantee provided by our founders to ensure we remain free from foreign invasion, and yes, as our founders clearly warned us, from an oppressive government like we see in Canada, Australia, and the Democrats' beloved communist China, is the constitutional right of law-abiding citizens to be armed as they choose. Over and over, the founders affirmed and reiterated that Congress has no power to limit the right of lawful citizens to arm themselves. But H.R. 2377 would create a nationwide system of red flag
The gentleman's time has expired.
Undermining this constitutional
The
guarantee
gentleman's
of due
time has
process,
expired.
which is required
The
for
gentleman's
depriving
time has
any American of their
The
Second
gentleman's
Amendment
time
right.
has expired.
Good job, Bobby.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At this time, I'd like to yield 3 minutes to Representative Carbajal.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Representative Macbeth. Madam Speaker, 8 years ago, my own community of Isla Vista, near UC Santa Barbara, saw firsthand the horror and the trauma that a mass shooting brings. And in 8 years since that attack, we stood in solidarity with other communities, reeling from the hundreds of mass shootings in our schools, our shopping malls, our houses of worship, and our main streets. Madam Speaker, I share the outrage and frustration of the majority of Americans and many of my colleagues here in Congress that there are some in Congress who have kept us from doing our job, from protecting children by blocking common sense gun safety measures. But I stand before you today as the author of a gun safety measure that has enjoyed bipartisan support, that has been implemented in Republican and Democratic-led states alike, and has been proven to reduce gun deaths and stop mass shootings before they happen. I'm speaking about extreme risk protection orders, or as they are more commonly known, red flag laws. These laws are simple, and if an individual is showing signs that they may be a danger to themselves or others, a police officer or family member can, through due process, go to a judge and request an extreme risk protection order, which temporarily bars that person from owning or purchasing a firearm. These laws are already on the books in 19 states and in the District of Columbia, and in those places, they have saved lives. As part of the reason these laws work is because warning signs of mass shootings are not as rare as you might think. In fact, a U.S. study of school violence found that the majority of incidents come with clear warning signs, which we've seen before some of our most infamous school shootings: Columbine, Sandy Hook, Parkland, and even Uvalde. That's why in the wake of these tragedies, Republican and Democratic-led states have approved red flag laws that have gone on to intervene in thousands of potentially violent attacks before they happen. Florida residents, for example, have used ERPOs more than 8,000 times since they implemented the red flag law after the Parkland shooting. California implemented the red flag law after the UCSB Isla Vista attack in my community, and the police officers have used it to prevent numerous workplace attacks and other violent incidents. These red flag laws are also critical to reducing the largest form of gun deaths in our country: suicide by firearm.
Madam Speaker,
gentleman's time has expired.
May we reserve 30 more seconds?
Gentlemen.
And as someone who lost one of my own siblings to suicide by a gun, I personally am proud to stand in this chamber today in her memory, Carmen, to see my bill come to a vote. This measure is popular, bipartisan, and common sense. That may be why Republican senators have introduced similar legislation in the past to incentivize states to expand red flag laws, and support states that already have them. There is no bill that we can pass that would be the panacea to solve our violence overnight. But with this measure and those we passed, we can make a major difference. We need to do this now.
The gentleman's
Thank
time
you
has
very much. I
expired.
yield back.
The gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Madam Speaker, we yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Alex de Tocqueville said that the defining trait of socialism is, quote, a profound opposition to personal liberty and scorn for individual reason, a complete contempt for the individual. You know, socialists are hostile to our Bill of Rights specifically because it protects the individual against the state by guaranteeing our most fundamental rights, the means to defend them, and the guarantee that we can't be deprived of them except through due process of law. You have a right to have your day in court, to face your accuser, to present evidence on your behalf, to contest the charges brought against you. Now, if someone is adjudged to be dangerously mentally ill, of course they should not have access to firearms or to any other weapons. They shouldn't be on the street where they can do harm at all. They should be confined during the course of their illness so they can be treated and not endanger themselves or others. And we already have commitment procedures that address this in concert with our Constitution. In that process, you appear before a judge, you get to know the charges, you can face your accuser, you can plead your case, and you can present evidence on your own behalf in open court. But not under this bill. Under this bill, an anonymous accuser, including a jilted date or an ex-roommate, can trigger a secret proceeding that you don't even know is happening until the police show up at your door to strip you of your Second Amendment right to self-defense. And the burden then falls on you to try and restore it. And it won't stop here. The left's already branded speech they disagree with as dangerous. But they are right about one thing. This is an extreme risk bill. It's an extreme risk to our most fundamental individual rights as Americans.
Reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Republican speakers obviously have more regard for their politics and for the National Rifle Association than they do for the lives of our children. We see that every moment here when they keep repeating the words that this is unconstitutional, when courts in 18 states and the District of Columbia have found them constitutional, and Supreme Court Justice Amy Coney Barrett, when on the Seventh Circuit, said, history is consistent with common sense. It demonstrates that legislatures have the power to prohibit dangerous people from possessing guns. So I don't think we should hear lectures on Democrats don't care about due process. We do. We also care about children's lives. Madam Speaker, I now yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Rhode Island, member of the Judiciary Committee, Mr. Cicilline.
The gentleman from Rhode Island is recognized for 2 minutes.
Madam Speaker, I rise today in strong support of the Federal Extreme Risk Protection Order Act. Before the Emmanuel Church shooting, before the Uvalde and El Paso and Parkland shootings and so many others, shooters showed warning signs or even flat out said what they were going to do. Before many die by suicide by gun, they show warning signs that they may be a danger to themselves. In these situations, there's often evidence that something terrible is going to happen. We know it, we can even articulate it, but we're often powerless to stop it. This bill remedies this situation. This bill would help prevent individuals who pose an imminent threat to themselves or others from accessing firearms by allowing law enforcement and family members to file a court petition in federal court to temporarily block dangerous individuals' access to guns. And despite the claim that this bill invades due process rights, this is absolutely false. It's a thinly veiled attempt to prevent any and all regulations of firearms in this country. As the chairman has said, it's been found constitutional. There's a hearing before the seizure with a judge, with witnesses, testimony under oath, affidavits. Judge makes a finding. Happens all the time in domestic violence cases. These guns can be only taken away for a temporary period after a hearing with a judge who determines on balance that it's necessary to do so for the safety of the gun owner or the community. This bill is so common sense. It's historically been bipartisan. The former Republican president supported it, introduced by Senator Lindsey Graham in the Senate. So I want to thank Congresswoman McBath. You know, our Republican colleagues this morning have been talking about their passion for the Second Amendment, their devotion to the right to bear arms. If only for a moment, they show the same devotion, the same commitment to preserving the life of young people, the right to live a life free from gun violence, to be able to go to a movie theater or church or synagogue and not worry about their life and their liberty because they're gunned down by someone who shouldn't have a firearm. This is absolutely the most common sense proposal that will come before Congress on guns. Keep them out of the hands of people who are dangerous to themselves. For God's sakes, vote for this bill. I yield back.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gates.
The gentleman from Florida is recognized for 2 minutes.
If House Democrats were so worried about violence, they wouldn't open the borders, open the prisons, and then disarm law-abiding Americans who want to protect themselves and protect their families. Chairman Nadler says that Republicans shouldn't lecture about constitutional rights, but it was the last Democrat speaker, Mr. Cicilline, who in the House Judiciary Committee said, "Spare me the bullshit about people's constitutional rights." So pardon us for standing up for the Constitution and the very due process that ensures that we're able to have a civil functioning society in this country. Speaker Pelosi asks the question, well, if you knew when the next act of violence would be, why wouldn't you want to stop it? What is this, the United States Congress or the plot for the movie Minority Report? The best you could ever hope to have in terms of warning is what we had in the Parkland case, where a neighbor saw Nicholas Cruz preparing for a school shooting, called the FBI, and because they were so focused on the bureaucracy, they didn't take action. And so that's why I'm against federalizing the regular police, and it's why I'm against federalizing the school police, because the more the FBI was involved, the more they botched the case, and maybe there were people dead who didn't need to be. These red flag laws violate our Second Amendment rights, our Fifth Amendment rights, and when they are done at the national level, they violate our 10th Amendment rights. And it is crazy that we are considering legislation to bribe the states to take rights away from our fellow Americans. And it's nuts that Republicans in the Senate, the very Republicans who say they're the classic liberty-minded conservatives, they're now working with Democrats on this very endeavor to federalize the school police and to engage in this bribery for the sake of deprivation of rights. Let me give you this warning, my friends. It is no victory, as Mr. Carbajal said, that in my beloved Florida, we've used red flag laws 8,000 times. There weren't 8,000 school shooters we stopped, probably not even 8,000 criminals. What we do see is that these red flag laws are used in divorce proceedings. They're used in every type of dispute, and it shouldn't be a cudgel that way. We'll stand up for the rights, and it's no bullshit that we will.
Members are reminded not to use profanity on the floor of the House of Representatives.
Reserve.
The gentleman reserves.
Well done.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 2 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Tennessee, a member of the Judiciary Committee, Mr. Cohen.
The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Mr. Chair. Since the massacre in Newtown, Connecticut, about 10 years ago, we have not enacted any substantive firearm restrictions to prevent children from being slaughtered in our schools. In fact, not since the massacre of first graders and their educators at Sandy Hook, but in the 20 years since the shooting at Columbine, we have not enacted any new meaningful restrictions on firearms. We have an obligation to protect our constituents, and we have a responsibility to keep the American people safe. After each of these instances, we hear from our friends across the aisle that we must address mental health. I agree. But we must prevent those who are intent on harming themselves or others from having access to dangerous weapons and carrying out their intent. That is why I support this thoughtful proposal balancing public safety and the individual's right to due process. Let's just take the massacre in Uvalde. Should there have been a law in place in Texas, a red flag law, perhaps the gunman could have been stopped. There were plenty of warning signs, including the gunman with pictures of a cat he had killed and his frequent online threats to teen girls. As chairman of the Constitution Subcommittee, I take the Due Process Clause seriously. In this legislation, a court would need to make an individualized determination looking at specific facts before issuing an order. A full hearing is required in 72 hours, where the party can have personal attendance and object. This legislation is absolutely necessary, and I urge all my colleagues to support it. We have a moral obligation to act. Yesterday, this body, with a bipartisan vote, adopted the Protecting Our Kids Act, which would make meaningful updates to our nation's gun laws. We must go further, I believe, and enact assault weapons bans. These bills would make a meaningful difference in gun violence in the United States and save American lives. God would not look kindly upon the use of weapons to kill his children, as happened in Uvalde, Texas. Our votes are not political calculations, they are obligations. We have a duty to protect God's children. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Madam Speaker, we yield a minute and a half to the gentlelady from Michigan, Ms. McClain.
Thank you, Madam
Speaker. The gentlewoman
Speaker.
is recognized for a minute and a half.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think what we need, again, is a little truth, transparency, and consistency. And I'll share as a mother of 4, I resent the fact that you tell me that I don't care about children. In fact, when you have soft on crime policies, I need my Second Amendment right to protect my own children because the soft on crime policies don't help. During these debates, these unconstitutional, the thing we all took an oath to uphold, the Democrats have been making the claim, well, if you can't buy alcohol or cigarettes, you shouldn't be able to buy an AR-15. All right, let's stick with that concept. Here's a concept, apply it throughout every form. But let's talk about a couple of things that the Democrats feel you are mature enough to do under the age of 18. So, because once again, their standards clearly aren't consistent. What a concept to be consistent. Democrats believe that under the age of 18, you should be able to get an abortion under the 18. And you know what, while you're at it, don't even talk to your parents about it. Under the age of 18, Democrats think you should be able to change your sex without notifying parents. At 18, you can vote. At 18, you can join the military and lay your life on the line for this country. And I bet they think that the 18-year-old Buffalo shooter is actually mature enough to be charged as an adult, right?
The gentlewoman's time has expired.
Let's have some consistency.
The gentlewoman's time has expired.
Good job. Very good, Diane.
God, I just get so fired up.
Reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to a member of the judiciary, the distinguished gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Dean.
The gentlewoman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, do we not hear the cries of the 4th grader in Uvalde who said, "All of my friends are dead"? Would you like to do something about gun slaughter in this country? Then join us. One common sense way we can do this is by passing my friend and colleague, Congresswoman McBath's Federal Emergency Risk Protection Order, red flag laws. We know that 46% of shootings, the attacker expressed interest in harming others. There was a cry for help, a warning. Someone knew that violence could erupt. Someone had the ability to intervene. We have a responsibility to intervene. Rep. McBath's bill would do just that. Intervene when someone is a risk to themselves or others. We do not have to live this way, fearful for our children at school, at movies, the grocery store, or the TLA on South Street in Philadelphia. We do not have to live this way, and we don't want to. 79% of Americans support red flag laws. 67% of gun owners stop sentencing our children to all of their
The gentlewoman's
friends
time
are
has
dead.
expired.
I yield back.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Madam Speaker, we yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Winstrup.
The gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Next week will mark the 5 years since the fateful morning on the baseball field, where 136 rounds were fired in an attack on Republicans. Only by the grace of God were 20 or more of my Republican colleagues and staff not killed by a crazed terrorist wielding guns on that baseball field. So this is not a theoretical exercise for many of us on this side of the aisle. I say this not to take away from the tragedies that any one of us has experienced, but to highlight that good people on both sides of this issue can bring our personal experiences to the debate and may see things differently while both condemning violence and wanting to act. When I reflect on that day, it's not about the weapon, it's about the person, the evil person that is on the other side of that weapon. And it was guns that stopped that killer. 2 Capitol Police undercover that were only there because Steve Scalise was there, and he got hit. Otherwise, that terrorist could have easily assassinated 20 to 30 members of Congress and staff. Clearly, there are people I don't want to have a gun in their hands. But we can't ignore the hate, the evil that is gripping too many in our country today. We have laws against murder, yet we see murder. If my little daughter hits her big brother, I want to know why. I don't blame the stick in her hand. As a physician, common sense tells me that if we don't look at the events in someone's life that lead to the thoughts and the feelings that then lead to this horrific, murderous behavior, then we are doing our society a grave injustice. And that's what's happening. We've seen this movie before. Do these laws change the disturbing trends that we're seeing? Previous bans have made no difference. It's been proven. Many of our communities have gun laws and have even more homicides than ever. We as Americans need to do some serious soul searching about ourselves because something serious has changed in our society over the last several decades. Is it the absence of God? We had a school, public school in my district that...
The gentleman's time has expired.
May I have 30 more seconds?
Give the gentleman additional 30 seconds.
We have a school in my district that was forced by the left and the courts to take down "Thou shalt not kill" from in front of the school. Thank you very much. Is it the breakdown of the family, the disruption of community, the implosion of the village, or is it the destruction of our mental health system, which unfortunately turned everyone onto the streets instead of reforming our institutions? It could be all these things and many more, but until America is willing to take a long, hard look at ourselves and heal what truly ails us, I fear we are simply doomed to repeat what we've done in the past, and we're doing it here today. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 2 minutes to the chairman of the Gun Violence Task Force, the distinguished gentleman from California, Mr. Thompson.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Madam Speaker, I rise in strong support of this legislation and thank Congresswoman McBath and Congressman Carbajal for the great work that they've done to put this together. Red flags laws are supported by a majority of Americans and nearly 70% of gun owners. Red flag laws provide an opportunity for an intervention if someone demonstrates that they are a danger to themselves or to others. California's red flag laws have been used 21 times to prevent mass shootings. The bill we're considering today was originally authored by Senator Lindsey Graham, a Republican, and is very similar to the Florida red flag bill that was signed by then Governor Rick Scott, also a Republican, and today a U.S. Senator. Neither of those two have ever been accused of being anti-gun or anti-Constitution. We know red flag laws save lives, and we know the issues raised by the other side of the aisle are a stretch at best. If someone files a false complaint, they're subject to a $5,000 fine and 5 years in jail. This bill will save lives, and I urge you to vote yes. The only real question is how much more bloodshed is needed to spur us to do the right thing and help us keep our kids and our communities safe. Please vote yes on this bill. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Madam Speaker, yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Davidson.
The gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. From the debate and from the whole premise of this red flag law proposal, you would think that there was no such way to deal with this problem in America. It's been pointed out that 19 states have red flag laws already, but there are 50 states that already have a way to have someone adjudicated mentally dangerous. Every single state, the premise that we can identify somebody who might pose a risk to themselves or others is the whole premise why red flag laws might work. But that's the same premise that allows Baker Acts to work in every single state in Washington, D.C. The difference is that the person charged, the person accused of being this mentally incompetent, mentally dangerous person, has the right to confront their accuser. And that's what they're trying to undo. It already exists in law. Everyone knows that we cannot accept our children being murdered. We can't accept our communities being destroyed and gutted, not just by violence, by increasing violence, by increasing acts of despair, not just shootings, but suicides, and the number one cause of death for 18 to 45-year-olds, fatal overdoses. There's something going on wrong. It's not the guns, it's the culture and the evildoer. When do we stop blaming the evildoer, the doer of evil deeds? And if you could identify who that doer of evil deeds might be, wouldn't you want to take them away from the weapons instead of taking the weapons away from them? If you don't take the person away, they can get other guns. They might even get a car and drive through a parade. Let's keep our communities safe. Let's keep our kids safe. Let's focus on the real problem and not just run the same play over and over again. The Democrats have a preconceived solution every emergency, and it's shameful to watch this exploitation of violence to achieve a Democrat longstanding objective to undermine our Second Amendment. I yield.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Byer.
The gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Chairman. Madam Speaker, I rise to express my strong support for H.R. 2377, the Federal Extreme Risk Protection Order Act. Included in this legislation is the Extreme Risk Protection Order Act, which I've been proud to co-lead for many years with my friend and colleague, Congressman Carbajal. Madam Speaker, April 16, 2007, 15 years ago, 32 Virginia Tech students in my home and Commonwealth were killed by a young man who is well known to the community to have paranoid schizophrenia. He'd been hospitalized, he'd been picked up by the police, he'd been banned from classes. There's every reason in the world for him to be on the background check list. Yet he was able to buy the weapons legally that killed those 32 kids. In 2014, I had a long conversation with a friend who was deeply depressed. He was having trouble getting out of bed, trouble finding a psychiatrist who would treat him. I made some calls to try to find somebody and then didn't do anything but worry, and was stunned when he got out of bed to go buy a gun and kill himself. To this day, I so regret that I did not call his wife, and we went together to the court to get him on the background check list. We've all lost too many friends. We all are grief-struck by the massacre of children. Red flag laws may not protect everyone, but it will save many lives, and it's a start.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Biggs.
The gentleman from Arizona is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Do you ever wonder how many of our colleagues in the Democrat aisle receive Bloomberg money to advocate for taking away Americans' Second Amendment rights? I do. We hear about the NRA. Sure don't want to confess the Bloomberg donations that you receive as you emasculate America's rights. Yeah, we hear about your polling. But you know what? 6 in 10 Americans, including almost half of Democrats, support armed officers and leaders at schools to protect their children. Democrats oppose that. We hear about due process. Due process doesn't mean you have an ex-parte hearing by an undisclosed informant who comes in and says, look, we think this person is a danger to themselves or others, when the person, the undisclosed informant, has a grudge or an axe to grind. That's why you have 8,000 of those in Florida. Due process doesn't mean we take away your rights and then you get to petition to have those rights reinstated. No, this bill is designed specifically to get around the laws that are present in 50 states that do address due process and do address people who are a danger to themselves and society. This bill is ripe for abuse. Some states have enacted similar laws. In Connecticut, for example, nearly a third of all ex-parte orders are overturned once a judge hears both sides of the story. And why is that? You've already taken away their rights. but almost a third of them are overturned. In a markup last week, there was some confusion as to what due process means. It does not mean that you can deprive an individual of their rights first and then later let them have a hearing to reinstate those rights. But that's what this bill does. Deprivation first, a hearing later. I urge you to vote no.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, and still I rise. And I rise today to address the indication that what we Democrats are doing is meaningless. Meaningless to ban bump stocks. Well, tell that to the 60 people who were murdered at the Mandalay Hotel, where a gunman fired more than 1,000 rounds in short order. Meaningless to raise the age to 21 to purchase an assault weapon. Explain that to the ghost of the 10 people who were killed at Tops grocery store. Make it clear to those 19 babies who were murdered at an elementary school in Texas. Meaningless? Tell that to the lives of those that have been lost. No, it's not meaningless. And what we're doing right now, my dear friends, is more than common sense. It's just good sense to prevent people from killing other people. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from Georgia, Ms. Green.
The gentlelady from Georgia is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. Well, we don't agree on much these days here in Congress, but I know there's one thing we all agree on. We all agree that we really like guns. See, we're the special privileged elites. We're the ones in this chamber being protected by guns, while the American people don't have men and women with guns outside their homes. Of course, not at any gun-free school zone, they're not protected, nor at work. But here Congress, the same Congress that's voting to send just millions and millions of dollars worth of guns to Ukraine so that they can defend themselves, is the same Congress working as hard as possible to take away the Second Amendment rights from Americans. You see, our job here is to protect rights like due process and the Second Amendment rights of Americans, not strip them away. Red flag gun laws violate Americans' due process rights, and this is the type of thing that we shouldn't be passing in this Congress, especially while we enjoy the very privileged elite special protection of guns.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, how much time does each side have, please?
The gentleman from New York has 6½ minutes. The gentleman from Ohio has 11 minutes.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, I now yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentlelady from Michigan, Ms. Lawrence.
The gentlewoman from Michigan is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to make an urgent plea for action. How can we listen to an 11-year-old girl talk about smearing herself with her own dead friend's blood so she doesn't get killed and think that the appropriate response is thoughts and prayers? It's unacceptable. We have the power to make real change and end gun violence. Right now, the American people are calling on us to protect their kids, their family, and their community. I am not going to sit on the sidelines, and neither should this legislative body. If not now, when? And every member should support common sense gun safety legislation, not taking away your right to own a gun or your right, your constitutional right, but use common sense. As my grandmother used to say, it's not very common today, but the people of America is counting on us. Act now.
The gentlewoman yields. The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
We've heard time and time again, Madam Speaker, that the Democrats say this is not a violation of due process, not a violation of our constitutional rights. It most certainly is. Remember the basics here. Someone doesn't like you. They file a complaint. There is a hearing within 24 hours, a hearing that you're not allowed to attend. You're not allowed to be there to face your accusers. The government takes your gun or guns. Several days later, there's a real hearing. Well, a real hearing with a lower standard. The burden of proof for the government is not beyond a reasonable doubt to deny you your constitutional right. It's a clear and convincing standard. So a lower standard to take away your fundamental liberty when you didn't commit any crime. If that's not a violation of due process, I do not know what is. And all this will be, the Title I of this bill, it'll all be administered by the Biden administration Department of Justice. The same Department of Justice that got a letter from a left-wing political organization and 5 days later sent a memorandum to every single U.S. attorney in this country saying this: set up a dedicated line of threat communication on parents, use counterterrorism measures against moms and dads who had the nerve to show up at a school board meeting and speak up for their kid. And then 16 days after that memorandum went out, the FBI sends an email out and says, put a threat tag, a designation, a label on moms and dads who did show up at school board meetings, who someone filed a complaint about, on that snitch line, and investigate them. That same Biden administration Justice Department will be administering this law. That is why we are so against this measure and why it is so darn dangerous. They can say all day long it doesn't violate due process. It most certainly does, and it's going to be administered by a Justice Department that's already proven they're willing to go after parents who speak up for their kids. That's why this bill is so terrible. And why Republican senators are pushing this and trying, as Mr. Gates from Florida said, trying to bribe states to implement this when we have the history of the Biden Justice Department and we know what this thing is going to look like and how it's going to violate due process. That's what's wrong with this legislation and why Republicans, why we're so darn against this thing. I hope they will come to their senses and stand up for the law-abiding American citizens and their fundamental liberties and vote this thing down. Madam Speaker, we reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I now yield 3 minutes to a member of the Judiciary Committee, the distinguished gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the chairman this morning, and let me thank Lucy McBath, and let me personally on the floor, we've said it many times, to offer my sympathy for the pain that you continue to live with for the loss of your son. And let me say to my friends, your arguments could not be more absurd. Over these last 2 days, I've heard welfare state. I am a person of faith, as all who profess such, challenging whether or not we have faith, speaking about the absurdity of not understanding the Constitution, disrespecting the democratic system that we have, that there will be an outrageous attack on individuals with the red flag laws. And so you're just simply wrong. And my plea is to the American people, because you can force people who masquerade as believing that it is a shame for children to die, but yet do nothing. This is the side of doing absolutely nothing, but casting aspersions and challenging what is right. Red flag law is right. Why? Indiana passed it in 2005, and in years since, the state's firearm suicide rate is going down 7.5%. They work. A little boy, 16 years old, in New York County, was getting ready to shoot up his students, had shotguns at home. An order was put forward, and he admitted that not having the guns in the home is helpful, and the order helped him. Is there no desire to do something in the name of those who died wrongly in Buffalo? Is there no desire? Are you not in any way aware of Zaire, a mother's child trying to work in a job and was severely injured? Are you not aware of Amira, 9 years old, who died and bled out as she called 911? Are you not aware? Are you not aware that 80% of people considering suicide give some of their plans, and nearly 80% of perpetrators of mass violence in public places make explicit threats? Red flag laws are crucial to saving lives. Yes, the FBI didn't act in Parkland, but a red flag law that was implemented by a Republican governor could have been effective. There would have been another tool. The Constitution, for some people, they can't seem to read it clearly. The amendment on the Second Amendment says to create a militia. But Justice Scalia, who is idolized by the right, made it very clear that the Second Amendment right is not unlimited. It is not a right to keep and carry any weapon whatsoever. I ask, I'm grateful to the chairman. Very quickly, let me say this. Do you want guns in the hands of dangerous people? I don't want Republicans shot. That was a dangerous person. Do you want it in the hands of guns of gang members? Do you want us to continue like all of these school shootings in the state of Texas? Let us realize where is your heart and ensure that the mentally ill are not the persons that are the ones that are most dangerous, but it is dangerous people who need red flag laws. And maybe we need to sit down in the name of John Lewis, who said, where is your heart and where is your soul? We need to pass this red flag law and all of our gun safety legislation, and the Senate should pass it as well. I yield back.
Members are reminded to direct their comments to the chair. The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Bishop.
The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 2 minutes.
The Fifth Amendment states, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. It is the paradox of the American experience that so many who swear to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution, the supreme law enshrining our fundamental rights, are so often predisposed to strip those rights, always with noble motive. Weeks ago, the Biden Department of Homeland Security formed a Disinformation Governance Board to become the arbiter of right think, even since disbanded. Bad idea. 2020, state governors ordered the healthy to stay out of their churches for fear of a virus. Do you remember? In 1971, the Department of Justice obtained a TRO, a prior restraint, to abridge freedom of the press by forbidding the New York Times to continue publishing the Pentagon Papers. Lower courts approved that, too. February 1942, another progressive Democrat, FDR, issued an executive order to intern U.S. citizens and residents of Japanese descent. It was greatly popular. 60% of Americans polled supported sending their fellow American citizens to concentration camps. It was approved not just by lower courts, but by the United States Supreme Court in Korematsu, 1944. And it took until 2018 for it to be repudiated. Look again what you justified. The long-existing Baker Acts provide due process. New York had a red flag law and did not detect the Buffalo shooter. The fierce urgency of now meets the protections of fundamental rights in the United States Constitution, and they must be vindicated. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized. The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Madam Speaker, yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman from Ohio. The gentlelady from Texas asked, do we want guns in the hands of dangerous people? And the answer to that question is, of course not. But the only question that matters is, who constitutes a dangerous person, who gets to decide, and why? That's the important part here. That's what we're talking about when we talk about due process. We have laws on the books, in I believe every state in the union, so-called Baker Act provisions, to civilly commit individuals who are a danger to themselves and others. We have such a law in Texas. but we didn't use it. And we didn't use it against a young man who wasn't in school, was harming defenseless animals, was talking about raping women, was clearly not well, and we didn't use it. There are more people killed in the United States by hands and knives than rifles. I don't want a crazy guy in my school with or without the ability to have a weapon. We should actually be serious about committing people who have mental health problems. That would actually solve the problem. Everything we are doing here today is a pretext. It is a pretext for targeting and confiscating and eliminating our ability to have weapons. When people say things, it's a good idea to believe them. President Biden, whether it's a 9mm pistol, whether it's a rifle, it's ridiculous. I'm continuing to push to eliminate the sale of those things. Representative Mondaire Jones, if the filibuster obstructs us, we will abolish it. If the Supreme Court objects, we will expand it. We will do whatever it takes. Representative Ocasio-Cortez, ban semi-automatics. House Democrats just yesterday tweeted, semi-automatic rifles are weapons of war. Future Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson was applauding New Zealand Prime Minister's commencement speech about New Zealand's banning semi-automatic rifles. Representative Beto O'Rourke, hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15. Even Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, the gentlelady from Texas, quote, I held an AR-15 in my hand. I wish I hadn't.
The gentleman's time has expired.
She talks about a 50 caliber bullet.
The gentleman's time
which
has
isn't
expired.
Even true.
The gentleman's time
this
has
is a pretext. We should oppose
The gentleman's time has expired.
Good job.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized. Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Here we go. 2 minutes to the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Massey.
Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the gentleman from Ohio. Everyone wants to stop mass public shooters, but we haven't previously punished people merely on the basis of a hunch, and we shouldn't start now. Stopping future crimes doesn't work in the movies, and it doesn't work in real life. What can work is providing mental health care and counseling to those who need it. If people truly pose a clear danger to themselves or others, they should be confined to a mental health facility. Simply denying them the legal right to buy a gun isn't a serious remedy. Actually, it's already possible to take a dangerous person's guns away. But Democrats are completely ignoring involuntary commitment laws that are on the books in all 50 states presently, known as the Baker Act in Florida or the 5150 Code in California. These laws are different than the ones that are proposed today in one very important aspect. They involve due process. What's the difference? In the existing involuntary commitment laws known as Baker Act, there's a mental health care expert involved. There's no such thing in the red flag laws. There's the ability to challenge your accuser to have a day in court before your rights are deprived. There's no such opportunity in the red flag laws. You get an attorney appointed to you if you can't afford it. No such thing in the red flag laws in many of the states. And there's pre-dawn raids that endanger the lives not just of the person we're worried about, but of the officers who are tasked with carrying out the raid. Red flag laws could actually increase the rate of homicide and suicide. Simply talking to other people about your health care issues and your mental health could help you overcome it, but people will be reluctant to do that if red flag laws are in place. Red flag laws have already created thousands of second-class citizens who no longer have the ability to purchase a firearm for defense in the states that have red flag laws. If this passes today, there will be millions of second-class citizens created in this country who've been deprived
The gentleman's
of due
time has
process
expired.
and the Second Amendment, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized. The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Pfluger.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today as a Texan and a father of 3 young girls who go to school and a defender of constitutional rights. And this is not just about doing something, this is about doing something that matters. The horror of the school shootings are an unforgivable tragedy due to the evil that we see in people. But there's room for bipartisan solutions. Unfortunately, Democrats don't want to make law, they want to make politics. Republicans offered an alternative, a bill that would fund school resource officers and mental health counselors, close gaps in security, and strengthen active shooter preparations, with all the costs being offset by the unused COVID funds. Unfortunately, this has been blocked by House Democrats. There is nothing more important than ensuring our children are safe. I know this because I take my children to school and drop them off and pick them up. But in no way are the recent tragedies justification for an infringement upon the rights of law-abiding Americans. I won't support legislation that infringes upon those rights being stripped without due process. This is an emotional issue, but it is our job to step back
The gentleman's
and
time
have an
has
adult
expired.
conversation.
The gentleman's
And
time
with
has
that,
expired.
I yield back.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized. The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Ohio is recognized.
I think we're prepared to close, Madam Speaker, if that's where the majority party's at.
I'm prepared to close.
The gentleman from Ohio.
I would yield a minute and a half to, I think that's what we have left, remaining time, to the gentleman from California, Mr. Ison.
Madam Speaker.
The gentleman from Ohio is recognized for a minute and a half. I'm sorry, California is the gentleman from California is recognized for a minute and a half.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And such time as I may consume is too short to recap these 2 days of the assault on the Second Amendment. I will only say in closing that it might seem reasonable in this bill, this 5 or 6 or 7 different bills cobbled together, it might seem reasonable that each of them makes sense. But I ask you, when we change the Constitution to give an 18-year-old the right to vote, if we simply said today, we've changed our mind, we want to make it 21, don't worry about the Constitution, wouldn't there be people saying that's ridiculous? Of course they would. And if we said the First Amendment gives you a right that should not be abridged, and suddenly we say, but we're going to have prior restraint because you might do or say something wrong, we'd say that's ridiculous. Madam Speaker, today, this affront on the Second Amendment is in fact ridiculous. Each piece may seem reasonable, but not in light of the significance of something enshrined in our Constitution, which is being systematically attacked by the other side. Today, we are defending the Second Amendment in a way we have not had to in a generation. We stand here not because there aren't some elements that seem reasonable in this legislation, but because at the end of the day, our friends on the other side of the aisle who are not willing to support laws that are on the books being enforced, are not willing to stand behind the law enforcement community that would like to enforce those, they are affronting and trying to undo the Second Amendment without a constitutional change. And with that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield myself the balance of our time.
The gentleman is recognized.
Madam Speaker, extreme risk laws save lives. It's that simple. And ultimately, that's what this debate should be about, saving lives. This legislation strikes a proper balance between protecting the due process rights of people in crisis and preventing tragedy by ensuring that those who pose an imminent danger to themselves or others do not have access to firearms. Madam Speaker, this debate has been surreal. Every court that has considered the question has concluded that red flag laws afford proper due process and are constitutional. We already know that extreme risk laws work, but less than half the states have those laws in effect. Let us pass this legislation today so that we can bring access to this life-saving tool nationwide. We know it's not enough. We know we need all the provisions of the bill we passed yesterday, and we should bring back the assault weapons ban. But what we cannot do should not block us from doing what we can do. We can save thousands of lives annually, so let us begin. I urge all members to support this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. The previous question is ordered on the bill as amended. The question is on engrossment and third reading of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. The ayes have it. Third reading.
A bill to authorize the issuance of extreme risk protection orders.
The question is on passage of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The